Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this incredible dialogue with the new Untouchables. And we are recording this on Friday, May 8th, 2026 at approximately 5:10 Eastern Daylight Time. And I want to get right into it just because it has been a whirlwind week. And I want to share a couple of things off the top, but just to kind of set the table, it's just, in my mind can hold a lot of thoughts at the same time, and sometimes I get it wrong or tongue tied as a result, which many times you guys tease me about. But my goodness, between the Voting Rights Act, all of the activity and the reaction that's happening today in Virginia, what's been going on in Tennessee, not to mention Louisiana, this in late, it just seems like it was immediate based on what you guys have, provided to us the last several weeks, especially the analysis on, the shadow docket and so forth. But that on top of the AI facilities in the West and these billionaires that are, involved with this sort of like zero regulation to prevent, these data centers that may be tied to all sorts of very, ominous scenarios, not to mention the environmental impact. But we're seeing the American people come out in waves to demonstrate against all of this. And yet this machine tends to be able to press forward in ways that I think is shocking everybody. And, well, I should say shocking everybody, but everybody on this panel. And we always know that Lewis Clark's going to have some good news at some point in this dialogue because of everything that he and his operation are involved with. But as we get moving into this conversation, June, I'm reminded of from the very beginning, literally a year ago, and this is our 76th episode, by the way, that you have said on many occasions that it's going to take a massive global downturn, maybe a global depression, all of those things that seem to create that entirety of maybe post-Civil War all the way through World War II, and just all of the sacrifices and incredible suffering that had to take place to eventually get us to the government that we're all watching slip through our fingers at the moment. I'm wondering if you can start us off with your insights.
Sure. And I want to start with the idea we've been here before. Roosevelt's speech to the Commonwealth Club in 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression, in the middle of his campaign for president, talked about the titans of finance measured by what they accomplished, but not by the means that allowed them to accomplish their ends. And he wanted to pose in opposition to the titans of finance he viewed as responsible for the Great Depression, what he would later call the New Deal, an ethic of equality, of government of service to the people, of an idea of community. And I want to suggest we are back to the point where we are ruled by those who think they are to be measured by how much money they have, not by the methods they use to get there. Where lying is a qualification for office, where the idea of virtue is to be ridiculed, where Roosevelt's idea of service is derided as the nanny state, or suggesting that it lacks masculine energy. And in thinking about how we got there, I want to be a little bit more precise because it starts with business. Trump is the most corrupt president in U.S. history by far. There was a nice session on the Bulwark this morning talking about what purports to be a bipartisan newsletter, with a newsletter recently on corruption, making the point that for the MAGA faithful, the extent of the corruption doesn't get through on Fox News, on Twitter, on the bubble universe. And that if you recognize, once you recognize it doesn't start with Trump. It starts with a change in corporate culture. And so let me just note a couple of those pieces. Roosevelt succeeded in ushering in a new ethic partly because of the Great Depression, more fundamentally because of World War II and 90% marginal tax rates. What followed World War II is the corporation man, derided for not being risk-taking or for being too complacent, but loyal, honest, identified with the company for life, caring about status among one's peers within a company with whom you expected to spend a career. When you look at what we've lost, I want to emphasize it starts with incentive pay tied to stock options. What happens in the 90s is CEO pay, which back in the 50s was maybe 20 times average worker pay, rise to a height of 399 times average worker pay. It's about 301 right now. That increase in CEO pay is tied to stock options specifically, but incentives that care about share price and short-term fluctuations in share price. So Jack Welch, who ushered in much of the new system, walked out the door, brilliantly successful because GE share price rose almost every quarter for 20 years. It doesn't matter that GE collapsed after he left because of decisions and changes to the company he made. What mattered was share price while he's CEO. He walks out the door very wealthy. Someone else takes the fall. When you look at what workers most want right now, there's a new book out. The billionaires have two parties. We want at least one for us. That what workers most want is job security and stability in their lives. I'm looking at new stuff on fertility. Why is fertility crashing? Because of the lack of stability and security. That's what undermines the family. That's what undermines the working class. And who are the engineers of insecurity? First and foremost, the Epstein class. The Epstein class that has network-like contacts that allow them to float around above the fray and make a killing on whatever new opportunities a financial crash opens up for them. But they're not dependent on stability and security for everyone else. They profit by making everybody else less secure. And then the modern Republican Party has been built on top of that. The modern Republican Party works overtime to take away healthcare, to make sure rural hospitals don't stay afloat in spite of federal legislation designed to help them, to make it easier to fire workers, to make it easier to rip off workers, to get rid of consumer protections, all of which undermines security and instability. How do we get there? By saying all that matters is how much money you have in the Cayman Islands. You will be, as Mitt Romney bragged during his election campaign in 2012, how you got the money. Doesn't matter. Lying is a mark of virtue.
In my eagerness to get started, I forgot to properly introduce Ms. Carbone. She is the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota, but I want to underscore as well, she's also an author whose expertise spans back to really these corporate mega mergers, but primarily I know there's a book, and I'll put it in the description below, June, because I've had the great fortune of speaking with you and your colleagues on this. But you've been in the trenches of studying really the war on the family forever, and the techniques of this corporatocracy configured based on what you mentioned, modern executive compensation, which of course we learned from William K. Black, among others, in The Making of a Con, is an extraordinary sort of way to turn to you, Mr. Paul Pelletier, the veteran of the Department of Justice, somebody who's in private practice, also an adjunct professor at George Washington University. But several years ago, more than several years ago, 5 years ago, when we released the Con, you and your colleagues on this panel, you wrote an op-ed that was a precursor to another magnificent article that you had written that was published, I believe, in The Atlantic, that was entitled The Manhattan Project. to basically deal with corporate corruption and malfeasance. And as I recall last week, and I happened to see the movie in between, as a matter of fact, or I should say, since the last time you were with us, you were traveling to New York last week. But I saw, of course, Project Hail Mary with Ryan Gosling. Absolutely loved it. But you had brought up we need a Project Hail Mary. How does that fit with what we just heard from Miss Carbone?
It's sort of the macro. It's sort of the macro fix that I think June is talking about. I think what we all sort of get involved in constantly because of the way Trump operates, we everybody in the press in particular starts chasing the little, shining object of that day, and we never sit down and talk about how are we going to fix this, right? And so I look at it in two steps. The first step is assuming we take back the House and potentially the Senate. What is Congress's job in that 2 years? Because remember, they're not going to be able to really legislate because the president will veto everything. They're not going to be able to really affect too much change, although they'll be able to look at the certainly cancel some of the Supreme Court nominations should they become up, or any other court nominations. So I just look at it in terms of what's the Manhattan Project for the next 2 years, or what's the real project that you're talking about, which is fixing our system, right? And so I think that the Manhattan Project for the next 2 years, assuming we get Congress back, is focusing on, number one, putting the guardrails back, and Congress can do that, right? They can fix the guardrails. They can investigate the administration and the corruption that June's talking about that's so rife in this administration. They can investigate that, and they can put guardrails back in. But the bigger picture, the Project Hail Mary that you're talking about, or that we're talking about, is how do we fix this so we're not back here again? How do we fix the court so it's not so fucked up permanently, right? And how do we fix the court? And there is really only one way to fix the court, and that is to either pack it or come up with another plan to make judges' terms only be every couple of years, so they're constantly being fed and replaced. Unless you fix that court, they're going to just strike down anything the Democrats do. So when the Democrats do come into power, hopefully in 3 years, when they have an election, and we do get the president, they can fix the court. What else do they need to fix? They need to fix the fucking laws. There has been so much on their plate that they hadn't touched for years. A woman's right to choose, the elections, gerrymandering. All of that stuff can be fixed by statute. Now, of course, you got to fix the court too to make that go away. And then finally, fixing the court will help, I think, in the end, as it relates to how in the hell are we going to deal with Citizens United, which are sort of the big picture Project Hail Mary things that they're going to have to take care of, right? So I look at it as those two things: Project Hail Mary, and then the sort of the Manhattan Project over the next 2 years. How are they going to bolt down Congress and everybody so that we can start at least chewing away at the things that will bring immediate relief, hopefully, to people. But that relief, that economic change, that corporate culture change that June talked about, it can't really be done if they don't control the presidency and the Supreme Court. So I think that all has to be done. And then the final thing, I think, in the Project Hail Mary analysis, and as you know, I'm writing an article that hopefully will outline specifically what they need to do. But the last thing I think that has to be done is changing the rule as it relates to the filibuster. So because I don't think the Democrats are ever going to have 10 extra seats in the Senate. And they have to, which they can do, they have to fix the filibuster so that they can pass legislation. And that filibuster doesn't mean eliminating it. It means changing it to its original format, which was you have to stand up and talk about that particular issue. Talk about it. Wasn't a veto. You just sit there and talk. So your filibuster was limited to the issues at hand. And with that, with the original filibuster, they can eliminate the stupidity of, well, we don't have 10 votes, so we're going to veto that legislation, and we're not going to be able to pass that. So at the end of the day, I think if on a macro level, on a Project Hail Mary level, those are the things that you've got to tackle before you can do anything that's a permanent fix that changes the corporate structure, that brings back economic equality to the people. That's what I'm talking about.
Wow. Well, that was a heavy hit right there with the J-Lo coffee cup, which are you friends with Ben Affleck?
I work with Jonathan Lopez, and he has a new law firm. That was his nickname, J-Lo.
All right. Well, that's awesome. But no one's going to accuse you or this podcast of thinking small, but at the same time, Paul, it really feels that way to me, right? I mean, given everything where we've come from, and I need to remind the audience here that Paul Pelletier, you just gave us that information, and hopefully I'll be able to downstream, also include his recent article about, Project Hail Mary. But I mean, Paul's been, as a senior prosecutor, in the midst of the biggest crimes, financial crimes in the United States, as many on this panel have for the past 3 decades. And we're looking at this situation right now where we've got a return to Jim Crow. We've got an environmental crisis on our hands. We've got, the entire system is completely falling apart right before our eyes, which you guys have all predicted from the very beginning, Project 2025 from the get-go. But at the same time, here we have this panel. And next up, I'm going to go to you, Marc Dann, the former AG from the state of Ohio, is in current private practice, as you can see behind Dan Law. But, I was thinking of you this week on so many levels, but particularly I heard Lawrence O'Donnell really talk about the Court of International Affairs and tariffs, as kind of a gateway to what you've been involved with in some of your clientele. But your colleagues here have opened up, this discussion with some of the most profoundly, huge gravity, I think, in our country's history. Where do you go from here?
Well, I think I want to get a little more granular and talk about how to reframe the Democratic Party as a law and order party. I mean, the way to approach this, because I noticed, and I was in court this morning on another equity stripping scheme of somebody approaching somebody in financial distress, essentially stealing their house, and as a promise to save their house, and then they were trying to evict this fella today, and I had an epiphany standing there in front of the local municipal court, where I had to explain this. We actually filed a class action counterclaim against this predator that preys on people at their most vulnerable, poor time. We had a lot of this going on back in 2008, you might remember, but it's making a comeback. And the problem is, the body rots from the head, and what we have is a state of lawlessness in this country, a state of we have a president who is setting the example that the only question anybody ought to ask about anything they do in life is what's in it for me. And that leads to low standards, to these boiler room operations, whether they're marketing payday loans or stealing the homes of people in financial distress, or selling cars that with 28% interest rates, or allowing or combining television stations, so as to drive the price of advertising higher for advertisers, which will drive the price of things higher for Americans. We got to relate that. We got to do is and the state AGs are going to be really important to this, as part of, because they are law enforcement guys. and women around the country is that we have to talk about this in the context of law enforcement. We have to talk about this as reestablishing the rule of law, not just in the courts, but in business transactions, in the way consumers are treated, in the way and what I think you can very easily demonstrate is by stripping the CFPB, by stripping the Federal Trade Commission of their authority and oversight, of stripping environmental regulations, of stripping the SEC of any meaningful oversight of cryptocurrency, or moving it there to strip any meaningful oversight of cryptocurrency, by failing to establish ground rules for AI, for failing to establish a set of ground rules for the data centers that are eating up farmland throughout the country and throughout Ohio. Now there's a plan to take urban areas and put these 200,000 square foot data centers sucking up electricity and water in the middle of those cities, meaning those neighborhoods will never have a chance because nobody works in those places. I mean, there's some construction jobs in building them, and certainly that's great. But that's where it ends. So there needs to be rules. We need to reestablish control, just like President Roosevelt talked about in his campaign in is it 32? Am I getting that right? And Teddy Roosevelt did, as Paul pointed out before him. That's what leadership looks like. Frame this as law and order. We're going to pass a set of bills. We're going to I challenge this Supreme Court to toss out strong, fair business regulations passed by Congress, not dependent on where Congress has punted the ball now for years and years to the regulatory agencies. Well, the Supreme Court took that away in some recent decisions, where the Chevron deference was given to regulations of agencies enforcing federal laws. So pass clear statutes, appoint serious law enforcement leaders to run those agencies. We not be about retribution, but be about reestablishing the rule of law in this country, so that once again, if people work hard and play by the rules, they won't wake up every day and get fucked.
Wow, I got to tell you, boy, the forthrightness of both you and Paul these last two have got my energy going to the next level, and I can't wait to hear what William K. Black will say to respond to this. And I want to just kind of add a couple of things here, Bill, from the standpoint that we just heard these big proclamations of these huge paradigmatic systemic sort of approaches to what we're dealing with, as we have week in and week out, right? But you've been in the trenches of this, Bill Black, one of the country's premier, not one of the premier regulators. He's an expert in criminology. He teaches at the University of Minnesota. I could go through the whole, CV, right? I mean, Bill's down there, been that. Just know that if there's somebody who knows anything about corruption, financial corruption, criminality, Bill Black has got the answers. And Bill, I just heard your colleague say we need, to restore law, which we've talked about. But I also think of this as like truth versus lies. You have been very forthright, for now maybe the entire year, that this entire administration depends on lies. We just looked at the FBI this past week, where Kash Patel, maybe in turmoil because he might be the next one voted off of Trump's island with his bourbon whiskey and all of the other ridiculous stuff that he's done. But did he not just basically create like a scenario within the FBI where he's turning the tables on everybody within the FBI to make them pass these tests, right? To see whether or not, whatever. I'll let you take it from here, but the whole thing's a mess.
Yeah. So everything the administration is doing is trying to ensure the most intense criminogenic environment in the history of the United States with nothing else close. And that means incredibly perverse incentives that encourage the most elite forms of fraud, predation, and corruption. And they are epidemic. And they are epidemic in our royal family that rules America. Essentially every adult within it, and indeed very young adults, gets enlisted in their scams. So, among the biggest of these scams, of course, is crypto. And crypto already played an enormous role in preventing, well, in doing two things. One, in creating this criminogenic environment uh, by heavily backing Trump and giving him the details, a roadmap of what you do. And this roadmap is constantly reinforced because they give a cut to the Trump family to ensure that they have the right incentives to do things pro crypto. Now, it is amazing. It is a testament to how scammy crypto is that they haven't produced the world's greatest bubble in crypto, because the product is so inherently fraudulent that they haven't been able to get the takeoff phase yet fully. They get it for months. They make a ton of money. They turned, the Trumps for the first time into real billionaires through these means, but largely they still do it through traditional means, which are fraud, rug pulls, in which they screw other people to get their money. Okay, last time around, crypto was the biggest funder of both parties during a significant period before Musk came in and gave those unprecedented amounts. And Musk is also, of course, associated with crypto scams. One of their primary targets was Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown is running, and just this week, he announced he was now open to hearing about how to help crypto. So instead of the public shifting so hard against corruption, so if you ask the public, do they hate corruption? They all say yes. But it ain't showing up in the dollars of the contributions. And as folks have alluded to, the Supreme Court has made a mockery of election finance, encouraging corporations to buy elections. And crypto is simply the most aggressive of the Epstein class in doing these things. But if we have one of the people who you would have hoped would be a leader of the fight against the crypto scum, this is a real tell. And, in terms of economics, our phrase is we don't care what you say so much. We care about what we call revealed preferences. And that means you reveal by your actions what you really believe. And so I would I'll turn this over in terms of brevity. In addition to what everybody before me has said, the United States has a unique advantage in producing real substantive reform really quickly. And that is, people don't like statistics. That isn't what drives them. What drives them is narrative. And in particular, narrative of somebody who went into the lion's den and didn't make peace with the lions, deliberately took them on. Those people are called whistleblowers in our country. They have the information that could be being brought in front of the American people now. We don't have to win midterm elections. The state legislatures can be doing this now. But assuredly, if the Democrats restore control of the House of Representatives, they should be already lining up the witnesses from the whistleblowers who can give direct evidence of what the scummy thing was that was done inside, that the people inside did it for scummy reasons, and how to fix it, because they are the experts in all of those things. And we can have our own plan to restore the rule of law and democracy, and it can be far more efficacious than the Trump plans out of heritage, because it's designed to actually do what the American people would like to do. So I'll hand it off to a story of whistleblowers and recent successes.
Yeah, I was thunderstruck based on what you just said about Sherrod Brown, and it would be natural to go back to you, Mark, but hopefully we can circle back to that because
I can reserve. I'm going to reserve 30 seconds for a little rebuttal on Sherrod, but yes.
Sure, but the first person to today's discussion, given his time, was extraordinary, and the last to go on here. Usually, I decided to do it this way, Lewis, because you always have good news for us in the midst of all of this, really disappointing and well, I should say it creates more of a resolve, which is good. But at the same time, you and your team at the Government Accountability Project, you've brought forth, this revelation that you've got literally thousands of whistleblowers. And, the key consideration to what Mr. Black has mentioned again, that we don't have to wait for the midterms. We could get moving with state legislatures now. But at the same time, we also need to get those on the other side of this conversation to like, subscribe, and share, and make sure that everybody starts to get hip that this is a pipeline to probably the most revelatory stories that exist, because especially with all of the mergers and acquisitions and complicit media and law firms that bent the knee and all of those sorts of scenarios. So enough on that. I look forward to what your report is this week, Mr. Clark.
We were essentially very pleased that the Department of Homeland Security, under its new leadership, decided to reinstate 15 of the whistleblowers who signed the Katrina the Katrina letter of dissent, essentially at FEMA, which is the Department of Homeland Security, these people came forward and said essentially that they did not have the funds, they didn't have the will, they didn't have the ability, increasingly because of cuts in programming and people, to be able to handle another Katrina event. And so a number of people, 140 or 50 people, signed this declaration, although most did not sign with their name, but a few people did, and we represented 15 of those people, and they have been 14, I'm sorry, of those people, and they've been reinstated to their job, after too many months of being on administrative leave. But they were reinstated, and the basis for the decision is that basically these people had exercised the First Amendment rights and had raised whistleblower concerns as well, and it was on that basis they were reinstated after a much too long investigation.
Well,
this is the second time they were reinstated. They were reinstated in December, but at that time, the Secretary of Homeland Security decided to reverse the decision. But that's not happening now.
Well, and to remind our viewers that you and your team had also had great success with Air in America, I believe, several weeks ago. And before that, you had a slew of really impactful scenarios and ongoing things with cases such as the derailment in Ohio. But I'm curious, given what we just heard about the FBI and all things Cash Patel, do you care to comment on any sort of insight to the DOJ?
Well, we certainly have about 5 times more whistleblowers at the FBI coming to our office than ever before, and they're streaming in, remaining confidential, and whatever information that they can give to us, we try our best to get it into investigative circles. But basically, the FBI is in revolt against this current administrator. Director, the ninth director, I now understand. And anyway, we are representing a FBI whistleblower about the decision at the top, very top of the Justice Department, to investigate and surveil protesters. And we're not talking about violent protesters. We're talking about people just demonstrating against what's happening in terms of ICE and its operations on the streets of America. And so they were supposed to investigate. And others at the FBI that we're representing and helping were essentially sacked because they were involved in the investigation of the January 6th insurrectionists and just doing their duty. In investigating at the behest of the Department of Justice, and for that reason, they were being pushed out. So the courts are holding firm. We're having some problems with the appeals courts, but at the district court level, there's been great progress in terms of having judges essentially. Of all appointments of both Democrats and Republicans, Trump judges as well are standing up for the rule of law, and we're having victory after victory in that regard. I think our most notable is the reinstatement of the Voice of America into an operating operation, and now, of course, we're fighting because we're trying to get everybody back on the job, which has been affirmed in the courts as well as the Court of Appeals. So they have to return these people to their jobs. But in addition, now we've brought another lawsuit, and that's now pending because what they've been asked to do at Voice of America is to essentially distribute disinformation to the world, as opposed to unbiased news, which has been the history and the charter and the mission of the Voice of America since 1942, when they were revealing to the world the atrocities of the Nazi regime.
Well, you said you heard it here first, America. I mean, you might be putting your finger in the wind and going, "Whoa, it kind of feels like propaganda," but here we have just firsthand evidence of such taking place with one of the more venerated, institutions of media or journalism in our country's history. I want to ask you this question to close out our segment here with you on at least. I'm going to turn it back to Mark and then get closing remarks for everyone. But I was always inspired by the fact that you started your career with the civil rights movement. I wonder if you can give us some parting thoughts about what you're seeing post this, the Voting Rights Act and everything that's taken place in the Supreme Court this past week.
Well, I mean, obviously, we are going to need in this country a return of the civil rights movement. This will be the third, iteration. The Civil War being one, but also then obviously what happened afterward. There was great freedom finally stretching through the South after the Civil War, and then that was shut down with Jim Crow, and now then the Civil Rights Movement finally broke the back of Jim Crow, and now we have a return in many regards to a new era of suppression of essentially the representation that that blacks in this country can have in Congress, especially throughout the South. And so we're going to have to fight back. I think that the one thing that sort of carries over for myself is that is that indeed what King, Martin Luther King Jr. said, is that the the arc of the moral universe does bend toward justice, but you have to understand that it doesn't happen automatically. And it happens with the participation and of civil society on making it happen. If it doesn't, if the civil society becomes cynical because they don't think anything will change, or it's suppressed because of its essentially corrupt leadership, then that will not happen, and we'll be just we'll be just history as a democracy.
Yeah, and we're not studying history anymore. We're living it, and it reminded me of the great William K. Black's moniker that it's not necessary to hope, to persevere. And I want to return back to you, Marc, for some thoughts here based on what Bill just said. But before so, I do want to, in the context of the South rises again, of course, Ohio being one of those tremendous states in the Civil War. But at the same time, boy, there's a lot of red hats in Ohio. And just, as I was looking at the primaries, it's just, I got to be honest with you, not living in Ohio, I felt like I was watching Captain Quint from Jaws scratching his nails again on the chalkboard when I saw Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm curious if you might, maybe the state of affairs in Ohio before you get to Sherrod Brown.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, but as I've said before, the prevailing winds are very, very strong. We have a much better environment than we did in 2006 when even somebody as electorally challenged as me was able to get elected statewide as a Democrat. That's the last time we swept most of the offices. That was 20 years ago. And we thought the winds were strong then. The winds now are gale force. The turnout in the primary among Democrats, contrasted to the turnout in the primary among Republicans, was massive. We took a 15-point disadvantage and turned it into a 15-point advantage. Now, that's not the best predictor necessarily of general election turnout, but it's a sign of what's going on. But we have to meet them. The question is, will the Democrats, Amy Acton, who's the nominee for governor, Sherrod Brown, who's the nominee for the Senate against John Husted, who I've talked before on this program about the first energy scandal in Ohio. John Husted was one of the architects of the first energy scandal. He helped them funnel money to the Speaker of the Ohio House. And brought the governor on board when he was lieutenant governor to this huge, $60 million of basic bribes through 501c4s and 501c3s through super PACs to Speaker Larry Householder, who's now serving a term in federal prison. And the governor on a bill that wouldn't have been passed without all that contribution, and signed by the governor at Husted's urging. So there's a huge opportunity here. Ramaswamy chose as lieutenant governor the president of the state senate, which has been another active participant in the first energy corruption. In the other corruption, the corruption of taking $600 million of unclaimed funds to give to the Cleveland Browns to build an indoor stadium, which we have an injunction stopping right now. Our firm is representing some of the folks that don't think their money should be used for that. And we've been successful so far, but again, that's up to the courts, and there's going to be we're a long way from there. But will the Democrats meet the moment and frame this election as a law and order election? We're going to stop corruption. We're going to make corrupt people who bribe politicians go to jail. Politicians who accept bribes and who accept the quid pro quo of the crypto industry or the AI industry, if they act on that quid pro quo, they go to jail. Strengthening the enforcement of state anti-corruption laws. We have a state RICO Act in Ohio. That's what we use to go after a mortgage servicer and the I'm sorry, mortgage originator and securitizer here that brought us together, Patrick, years ago, and all the rest of it. It brought me into this group of the rest of us. That law is still on the books, and it could be used to go after these folks for doing those kinds of things. Sherrod Brown needs to not look. It was his campaign manager that talked about the crypto industry. I've known Sherrod Brown for 40 years. His brother and I are very dear friends. His brother was the Attorney General in West Virginia and was my first boss. And Sherrod, I was Sherrod's driver. I was the worst driver Sherrod ever had in 1982 when he ran for Secretary of State for the first time. And I didn't last very long in that job. But I had other skills that they were able to tap into to help Sherrod get elected. And we both ran on the ticket in 2006. And what I know is this. I mean, Sherrod is a person of courage, and does believe in the rule of law, and does believe that. But again, and I think his heart is in the right place to want to protect working class Ohioans from the Epstein class, as June frames it, and properly so. But he needs to frame it in a law and order context, in a law and order message that we are going to clean. We're not going to clean up this bad behavior. We're not going to pick our supporters over their supporters. We're going to pick honor, honesty, and integrity and law abiding folks. Let's make the world safe for law abiding businesses to succeed in this country. That's what Democrats need to be talking about, whether they're, and I don't care what it is. And by the way, we watched on election day here, the crypto and AI industry pumped $1 million into a Democratic candidate for a leaning Republican congressional seat with a Republican incumbent. So the likelihood of the Democrat winning that seat was relatively low. $1 million into the primary, and won the primary seat. And by the way, the guy they spent it on was endorsed by Bernie Sanders, who came here and had a rally with him. And so the world is upside down. We can't allow the Bernie Sanders and Sherrod Browns of the world to just acquiesce to this. And I know as a candidate, it's always a challenge. You're weighing, okay, I don't want to give anything up tactically that I might be able to muster for my campaign. Sherrod, can I take the wind out of the sails of these people that might spend more? Maybe they'll spend a little less money on John Husted by saying I'd be willing to listen to what they have to say. So I understand the tactical side of it, but we need to play the long game here, and we need to stand for something, and we need the Bernie Sanders and the people he supports and Sherrod Browns of the world to loudly and proudly say, we're going to enforce the law. And of course, if the crypto industry operates legally and ethically and doesn't cheat poor people, then they have every right to sell their wares in this country and let the market decide whether people ought to get them. That's the same thing he said, but I'm saying it in a totally different manner. And can we get Democrats to focus on that and to then say, we're going to pass laws that are going to put guardrails around what these people do. We're going to pass laws that allow people to decide whether they want all of their water and the electricity from their community to be fed into a data center or which isn't going to employ any of them. Those communities, and if they're going to go in there, well, damn it, they should pay those communities for what they're taking from them. They're taking that farmland, they're taking that electricity, raising the rates of everybody, the way electricity rates are set in Ohio and in most states. It's based on global demand, not, so there needs to be a carve out for these energy sucking data centers, if there is one, and they ought to write a big check every year to the community who they're taking something from, so that they can do something else with the rest of the land that might put people to work, that will give people comfort, that will create green space. I don't know what it is, but it ought to be something. And that's what Democrats need to be talking about in very granular specifics. I'm for any crypto company that follows the law. Unfortunately, right now, most of them aren't. But I'm hopeful that some. Okay, none of Paul's right. None of them are. None of them are. I mean, what's next?
Can be.
Can be.
Crypto is a scam.
Right.
None of them can be honest.
Because, right. Well, and that's fine. But if they can find a way to do it honestly and transparently in a way that's fair, if you can run a prediction market in a way that's not going to favor people with inside information, go to it. But if you're not going to be able to do that, then you ought to be stopped.
Mark, you're beginning to sound like a politician. And I want you to know, Bill and I debated today what Sherrod Brown was doing. And my view is right now, there are more important issues for him to stake out. But I want to emphasize what's wrong. I have friends in California, corporate law professors, and they talk to these guys. They talk to the people who financed Trump's campaign, and they said to her, straight out, this is in October, we know Trump will be bad for the country. We don't care. We're in trouble. We need him. And that's the mindset that has gotten us here. And that's the mindset that will destroy the United States.
Me first.
No,
Me first.
We need corruption to survive.
Yeah.
And so that goes to the question. I mean, the question I've wanted to ask Paul is, my shorter Supreme Court reform, shorter, easier perhaps than court packing, might be genuine ethics reform. Can Congress pass a law with ethics? Supreme Court can't review it. It has a clear conflict of interest. Somebody else oversees it. And we have rules for mandatory disqualification of, and you can put it in the law. Clarence Thomas can no longer sit on any case in which anybody who's given him money has anything to do with. John Roberts can no longer sit on any case in which lawyers who financed his wife's placement agency, a clear, hey, here's some money, and remember us later, kind of, not illegal, clearly unethical. John Roberts can't sit in any of those cases. My guess is that the people who found the Federalist Society would be calling for their resignations overnight. At least when a Republican is in office, we just eliminate them from the cases in which they have clear conflicts of interest. But how you bring back the country as a whole, and I think here our lesson has to be taken from Hungary. When people connect the corruption to the price of gas, then a whole lot more becomes possible.
Yep. And June, first of all, as it relates to ethics, 100%, my fear is that this Supreme Court will get 5 votes to say the ethics rules don't apply to them. That's my biggest fear. And then
you have to say they have no jurisdiction over ethics rules that govern them.
But I agree with you. The common thread, I think, that all of us are talking about today is that the economy is what's going to sink this administration and jettison the Democratic Party. The way you link the economy, the shittiness of the economy, other than the price of gas, which everybody feels, which is more than the price of eggs hurting people. The way you link that to law and order is through corruption, just like you said. But the reality is that you have to have a movement, and it's those two things which can create the movement. As we've all seen with no kings and that type of thing, the movement is being created. There hasn't been a time in American history where the change that needed to occur has occurred without such a movement. And you talked about 1932 and the Great Depression and the New Deal. That was all because people moved for it. And then we got up to the Civil Rights Movement. All those changes, the Voting Rights Act, happened because of the movement, the anti-war movement, because of the people were motivated to move. And then when we had the great financial crisis, there was no fucking movement, nothing. We had
Yes, there was.
well,
The Tea Party, the anti-movement.
I got it. I get it. Right. The reverse movement. And then we had the what was it called? Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street. But it fizzled, right?
Right.
It fizzled.
Because it didn't ask the right questions. It didn't ask the questions.
I get it. We'll go back to you, Pat, in a minute. But Patrick, in a minute. But the reality is, I think we have that movement now, and that's what we've got to do. It's the civil rights movement of today, just like Lewis said. And I think that if we can thread that needle from you're suffering because of corruption, and it is because of corruption on many levels, then it fortifies the movement, it gets people to vote, and then we can implement exactly what everybody's been talking about here today.
And we need to unite these movements. John Stewart had on at one point, an old style Southern country sheriff saying, hey, it's not that we don't want people to vote because they're black. We don't want people to vote because they're Democrats.
Yep.
And what unites the Supreme Court and the racists in the South is their antipathy toward Democrats. And this is something that unites the cause of civil rights and the cause of the fight against the Epstein class are deeply linked. It's just that we need a way of talking about it that brings that home.
Can I end this with some good news, which I rarely do, and that draws this movement together? Again, you just heard about the FBI and the wave of whistleblowers coming forward. The FBI is overwhelmingly Republican and deeply conservative. 4 of us on this panel who've worked for a long time, decades, with the FBI. They are super conservative. I've mentioned that U.S. has more whistleblowers than the rest of the world combined. And part of the reason is we have the world's premier whistleblower organizations, of which we have the daddy of them all, granddaddy of them all, that has had more success than anyone on this panel. And our whistleblower protective groups, as exemplified by Lewis, never ask, well, what's your party? Do you share my political views? We just go out and protect the whistleblowers. And the FBI whistleblowers statistically are likely to be highly conservative, and that has nothing to do with their decision to blow the whistle. It's not like conservative people are unwilling to be ethical and to take enormous risks for the country and for their profession and for their own view of integrity. America has all those things. They can bring us home, and they can bring us much of that unity in the process.
And that's what the new Untouchables exemplifies each and every week, which is what I was desperate for in my search that led to these folks, which was all about character and integrity. And as we close this out, of course, just to remind the viewers who you're listening to here, June Carbone knows the details of everything from Jack Welch and the go-go mergers and acquisitions of the 80s, all the way through Elon Musk holding up his chainsaw on all things Silicon Valley tech bros, but more on a micro level as it relates to the American family. You once you dig in, you won't believe how much just tyranny that this system has created in the uncertainty of American families. To her left, I mean, at least on my screen, Marc Dann, he mentioned it, but I just want to remind everybody that as the state AG of Ohio, he put together the the only RICO conviction of a mid-level player. And when I say mid-level player, we're talking $68 to $80 million, but the same scam that the entire tens of trillions of dollars that destroyed the global economy, the Titans of Wall Street were doing. And if you ever see the con, you'll see that his crack staff literally had a line to Goldman Sachs. It's one of the greatest lines I've ever seen when your director of forensics called Goldman Sachs and they acted like your team didn't know what they were talking about when you had him dead to rights. Paul Pelletier, I'd say it each and every week. He's been around forever, but at the highest levels of everything, his whole career at the Department of Justice, he had to question because he wasn't allowed to move forward with the prosecution of AIG when I think he had them dead to rights. But this is the sort of level of expertise you're dealing with. Lewis Clark, the Government Accountability Project, I believe you're celebrating your 50th anniversary. Was it 1976 when you started, or is it 1978?
It's 77.
I split the difference. But,
Yeah.
but you've been involved
Next year.
It's like mortars, one short, one long.
But they've been dealing with the top whistleblower cases in the history of the United States in that time period. And then, of course, none other than William K. Black, who he and his team with Ed Gray and everybody during the savings and loan crisis worked for up by and for the people to put 7,000 white-collar executives behind bars in a scam that was monumentally harder than – we're looking at just stuff that's child's play in comparison to what Bill Black and his team did back then. These are the professionals. These are the new untouchables. Who am I? I'm a guy that just knows how to ask questions. On behalf of the new untouchables, I'm Patrick Lovell. Until we see you next time, thank you for everyone and all the work that you do on behalf of by and for the people. Onwards and upwards. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.